money was gone. Not all of it, but enough. Enough that when I checked my phone sitting in the parking lot of the bank, my hands went cold even though it was July. I didn't go straight home. I sat in that car for 20 minutes, staring at the transaction history, scrolling up and back like the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I want to back up, because none of this makes sense unless you know who I was before all of it. I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. Roads, drainage, bridge inspections, the kind of work where if you cut corners, someone gets hurt. I retired 2 years early. Not because I wanted to, but because my knees gave out on me, and standing on job sites in the cold became something I couldn't push through anymore. I'm not complaining. I had a pension. I had savings. I had a paid-off house in a mid-sized town in Ohio that I'd owned since 1998. My first wife passed away 9 years ago. Breast cancer. We had 22 years together, and I won't pretend those last months weren't the hardest thing I ever lived through. After she was gone, I threw myself into work. That was my way of not falling apart. 4 years ago, I met a woman I'll call my wife. I won't use her name. She was 51 at the time, sharp-looking, funny in the dry way I liked, and she'd been through a rough divorce herself about 6 years before we met. We had dinner a few times, then more dinners, then a year of what felt like genuine partnership. She was thoughtful. She asked questions about my work, remembered things I told her, called me on my birthday before I expected it. We got married in a small ceremony. Just family and a few close friends. Nothing flashy. I didn't need flashy. She had a son. He was 26 when we married. I'll call him her son. I knew about him going in. She'd mentioned he'd had a rough couple of years, some trouble keeping jobs, living in a shared apartment across town. She talked about him the way a lot of mothers talk about their struggling kids, with that particular mix of love and exhaustion that tells you the situation is complicated. For the first several months, I barely saw him. He came to the wedding, shook my hand, seemed okay, polite enough. He was working at a warehouse at the time, or so I was told. Then the warehouse laid off people, and everything changed. My wife brought it up gently at first. He was behind on rent. His roommate had already left. Could he stay with us for a month or two, just until he got back on his feet? I said yes, of course I did. He was her son. I had the space. He moved in on a Sunday in March with 3 duffel bags and a gaming chair. The gaming chair should have told me something. He was polite at first, said good morning, cleaned up after himself in the kitchen, at least for the first week or two. Then the pattern started. He slept until noon. He was awake until 3 in the morning. I'd hear the television through the wall. He wasn't applying for jobs as far as I could tell. When I asked, casually, how the search was going, he'd give me a vague answer about applications being out, about interviews being slow to schedule, about the market being rough right now. I believed him. I'm the kind of man who takes people at their word until I have a reason not to. A month passed, then 2, then 4. My wife and I didn't talk about it directly, which was my mistake. I told myself she was embarrassed, that she was handling it, that this was a temporary thing and pushing too hard would create friction between us that wasn't worth it. I was trying to be the patient man, the understanding husband. The first time money went missing, I explained it away. I had a joint account with my wife, checking for household expenses, groceries, utilities, the occasional dinner out. I'd transfer a set amount each month from my personal savings account into that joint account. I kept my pension and the bulk of my savings separate in my name only. That was just habit. Something I'd always done, even in my first marriage. Not because I didn't trust anyone, just because I believed in keeping things organized. In September, I noticed the joint account was lower than it should have been, about $300 short. I looked at the transactions, and there was a charge at an auto parts store I didn't recognize, and another one at some clothing shop I'd never heard of. I mentioned it to my wife that evening, and she said it was probably just her. She'd helped her son get some things for his car, and she'd picked up a few things for herself. She said it casually, like it was already understood between us. I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. Over the next several months, I started seeing it more frequently. Charges I didn't recognize. A restaurant across town where neither of us had been. A sporting goods store. $60 at a pharmacy. None of these were huge, but they were consistent, and they were always explained away. She'd helped him with this. She'd needed that. It wasn't a big deal. The gaming chair turned into a second monitor. The second monitor turned into a new pair of sneakers I noticed by the front door, still in the box. When I picked up the box, it was a brand that runs about $200 a pair. I didn't say anything that day. I just put the box back where it was. There was the car. His car needed brake work in November. He didn't have the money. My wife asked if we could cover it, just this once. He'd pay us back when he was on his feet. I agreed. The amount was $420. I have the receipt because I paid for it directly, at the shop, in cash. He never paid it back. In January, he said his phone needed replacing. The screen was cracked. He couldn't apply for jobs without a working phone. My wife asked me, without quite looking me in the eye. I said fine. $178. He never paid that back either. By February, I had a running number in my head. Not counting the joint account withdrawals I couldn't fully trace, the amounts I knew about directly. The car repair, the phone. One time I'd handed him $40 cash for what he said was gas money. Another time I'd covered a prescription my wife said was urgent. Came to just over $800. Gone. With no acknowledgement, no repayment plan, no mention of it at all. One evening in February, I sat down with my wife after dinner, while her son was in his room. I kept my voice even. I told her I wanted to talk about the household finances, about the joint account charges, about the money we'd loaned her son. I said I wasn't angry. I just wanted us to be on the same page. She got quiet. Then she said he was struggling, that the job market was hard, that I'd known he was in a difficult place when he moved in, that she needed me to be patient. I said patience was one thing. I said 8 months with no real job search and no effort to repay what he owed was something else. I said I felt like I was being used and that I needed it to stop. She didn't say I was wrong, but she didn't say I was right either. Her son knocked on the bedroom door that night. I don't know if he told him we'd talked or if he'd heard us, but he came in with this look on his face, that specific look young people get when they've decided to be aggrieved before the conversation starts, and he said he felt unwelcome in the house. I said he was welcome as a guest. I said I'd been glad to help, but I said a guest didn't draw from accounts without asking, and a guest didn't borrow money with no intention of returning it. He said he had every intention. I said I hope so. He went quiet. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "My mom told me this house was ours too." I sat with that for a moment. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "This is my house. It has been since 1998. He walked out and the front door closed behind him hard enough to rattle the frame. My wife didn't look at me for the rest of that night. The next 2 weeks were cold in a way that had nothing to do with February. We were polite to each other. Civil. But something had shifted and we both knew it. Her son came back after a few days, and the three of us existed in that house like three people in a waiting room, not talking about what we were all waiting for. I started paying closer attention to the joint account. I'd check it on my phone every day. What I found in March stopped me cold. 11 transactions over 22 days, most of them small, 20 here, 30 there, one for $64 at a grocery store, 2 towns over that neither of us had any reason to visit, and one larger one, $190 at what appeared to be an electronics retailer. I added it up, $382 in 3 weeks. I sat with that number. I thought about the fact that I was 63 years old, that I'd spent 31 years building a life with care and discipline, that I'd been putting money aside since I was 27 years old, that I had done everything the way you're supposed to do it. And I was sitting here watching it drain away into someone else's unaccountable life. That was the morning something settled in me. Not anger exactly, something quieter and more final. I didn't say a word about what I'd found. That afternoon, I drove to a different branch of my bank, not the one my wife and I typically used, and I sat down with someone in an office and I made some changes. I opened a new personal checking account and linked my pension direct deposit to it. I set up a new savings account under my name only. I requested a new debit card and had them deactivate the old one. I transferred the joint account down to $300, enough to cover anything that might auto-draft in the next week or two. And I made a note to close it properly once I'd moved all the recurring bills off it. I drove home. My wife's car was in the driveway. Her son's car was there too. When I walked in, they were both in the living room, and they were waiting for me. Not in a natural way. Not the way people end up in the same room. They were positioned. She was on the couch with her arms crossed. He was standing near the kitchen doorway, and I could see the moment they'd been staging before I arrived. She said, "I tried to use the card today. I set my keys on the side table the way I always do, and I said, 'I know.'" She said, "What do you mean you know? What did you do?" Her son's face had that look again, the aggrieved one, but harder now. He said, "She almost had a situation at the grocery store." I said, "I moved my money." She said, "That's our money. That's the household account." I said, "The household account has $300 in it. That should cover this week." She said my name. She said it in that way people use your name when they want to make something feel more serious, when they want to pull you back into the role they've cast for you. I sat down in the armchair, across from the couch. Not close. I didn't want to stand over her, but I didn't want to sit beside her either. I said, "I'd like to talk about money. All of it. The charges on the joint account over the past several months, the car repair in November, the phone in January, the $800 and some that I've tracked that was borrowed with no repayment of any kind." She said, "I can't believe you're doing this right now." I said, "When would be a better time?" She looked at her son. That was a thing I won't forget. Not what she said. The look. The way her eyes went to him first, and he gave her a small nod. Like they'd already decided how this was going to go. She said I had changed since he moved in, that I'd become cold, that I'd never really accepted him. I said, "I covered his car repair. I paid for his phone. I didn't say a word for 8 months while he lived here and didn't contribute and didn't look for work in any serious way. If that's cold, I'm not sure what warmth looks like to you." Her son said, "You don't know anything about what I've been doing." I said, "You're right. I don't, because you've never told me." There was a silence that went on long enough to be its own kind of statement. I said, "I'm not asking him to leave today. But I am telling you both that this arrangement is changing. If he's going to live here, he contributes to the household. Not a favor, not when he can. A set amount each month, applied to utilities and groceries. I've looked at what's fair. $350 a month is below what he'd pay anywhere else, and below what he's cost me in the past 8 months. She said that was impossible, that he didn't have it. I said, "Then we have a different problem." Her son said, "I'm not paying rent to live in my mother's house." I said, "This is not your mother's house. This is my house. I've said that once before, and I'll say it once more." He said something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. My wife stood up. She said she couldn't believe what I had become. She said she needed to think. She went to the bedroom. Her son looked at me for a moment, not with the aggrieved look anymore, with something more like calculation. Then he went down the hall. I sat in the armchair for a while. I could hear them talking behind the closed door. Not the words, just the rhythm of it, the back and forth. After about an hour, my wife came back out. She sat on the couch again, but differently. Not staged. Tired. She said they were going to look for a place. I said, "Okay." She said she needed some time, maybe 2 months. I said 2 months was reasonable, and that I'd like to revisit the joint account arrangement, meaning I'd be scaling back the monthly transfer while she made her plans. She said that was fine, in a voice that made clear it was not fine, but that she had run out of room to argue. They stayed for 6 weeks, not 8. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't expected, not uncomfortable, just honest. I made coffee in the mornings. I watched the news. I checked my accounts the way I should have been doing all along. My wife and I spoke, but not the way we used to. There was a thing between us that didn't have a name yet, but we both knew it was there. The morning she left, her son loaded boxes into his car first. He didn't speak to me. He carried boxes past me where I was standing in the kitchen doorway, and he looked at a spot just past my shoulder each time. I didn't try to stop him, didn't say anything. When he was done, he got in his car and sat with the engine running. My wife stood in the kitchen with me for a moment. She had her purse over her shoulder and a box in her hands. Things from the counter she'd accumulated over 2 years. small items that had become part of the house without my quite noticing. She said, "I'm sorry it got here." I said, "So am I." She said, "He needed me." I said, "I understand that." She said, "You could have been more flexible." I thought about that, about what flexibility had cost me already. About the 8 months I'd stayed quiet, the money I'd watched leave, the morning I'd sat in a bank parking lot in July staring at transactions that didn't add up. I said, "I don't think flexibility was the problem." She didn't respond to that. She nodded once, and she walked out through the front door, and I heard her car door close, and then the sound of 2 engines pulling out of my driveway and down the street. I went back to the kitchen and poured the last half of my coffee down the drain and made a fresh pot. The house was mine again. Fully, quietly, unmistakably mine. I won't pretend I didn't feel it. The particular loneliness of a house that used to have people in it. It's a real thing. I'm not going to dress it up. But I'll tell you something else that's real. That same afternoon I sat down at my desk and I went through every account, every transaction, every automatic payment. I knew exactly what I had and exactly where it was going. I updated my direct deposit confirmation, checked my beneficiaries, made a note to meet with my financial advisor the following week. I'd been 63 years old for about 4 months now. I've worked since I was 16. I built what I have by paying attention, by doing the math, by not looking away from numbers, even when they were inconvenient. I looked away for a while. I won't do that again. I think about the man I was, at the beginning of all this. Willing to believe the best. Willing to give time and room and patience. I don't regret being that man. I just understand now that there's a version of generosity that helps people, and a version that mostly helps them keep not doing the hard things they need to do. I know the difference now. I know it in a way I didn't before, and I carry it lightly, because it's simply true. The way a lot of hard things are simply true once you've lived all the way through them. There's a moment, and I think most people who've been through something like this know exactly what I'm talking about, when you stop lying to yourself. Not a dramatic moment. No music. No revelation. Just a quiet morning, a phone screen, and a number that doesn't add up. That was the moment for me. Sitting in a parking lot in July, scrolling through transactions on a joint account I'd trusted someone else to treat with the same care I did. She didn't, and I had let that happen for a long time before I admitted it to myself. I've thought a lot about why I waited so long. Part of it was that I didn't want to be the kind of man who keeps score in a marriage. Part of it was that I genuinely believed, month after month, that things would correct themselves, that my wife would set limits with her son, that he'd find work, that the borrowing would slow down on its own. I extended what I thought was grace. Looking back, it was closer to avoidance. There's a difference between being patient and being unwilling to see what's in front of you. And for about 8 months, I confused the two. The honest thing is this: I had the information early. The charges were there. The patterns were there. The conversation I finally had in February, I could have had in October. What I lacked wasn't evidence. It was the willingness to act on what I already knew. It's not a moral failing exactly, but it is a failure of clear thinking, and clear thinking is something I'd prided myself on for 63 years. Engineers don't ignore data. I ignored data. What changed wasn't my circumstances. It was me. Something settled in me that morning in the parking lot. A kind of decision that came without fanfare. And once it settled, I didn't second guess it. I drove to the bank. I made the changes. I drove home. I sat in the armchair and I answered every question calmly, because I'd already done the hard part alone, before anyone was watching. That's the thing about integrity. The real kind, not the performed kind. It doesn't require an audience. The decision I made at that bank branch, no one saw it. Her son didn't see it. My wife didn't see it. It was just me and a bank employee in a small office on a Tuesday afternoon, and I walked out knowing I'd done what I should have done months earlier. And the steadiness it took to sit across from 2 angry people and not raise my voice, not retreat, not apologize for protecting what I'd spent a lifetime building, that didn't come from stubbornness. It came from having already decided, from having sat with the discomfort long enough that the discomfort no longer had anything to threaten me with. I'm not proud of how long it took me to get there, but I'm not ashamed of where I ended up either. The house is quiet now. I know exactly what's in every account. I drink my coffee in the morning, and I read, and I don't wait for anyone to explain themselves to me. I think that's what it looks like, finally, to take care of yourself. Not with anger, not with grievance, but with the same steady attention you'd give any problem worth solving.